I'm now going to continue my video series on Henry Ward Beecher and his sermons by discussing Acts chapter 27, verses 10 and 11. Now, what was going on here? Paul was boarding a ship. Something inside of Paul stirred him up and caused him to walk up to a Roman centurion that was on board this ship and say, "Hey, I don't think we should be sailing right now. The reason for this is if we do, we're going to end up in a total disaster." Well, the Roman centurion turned back to him and said, "Look, what kind of expertise do you have? Are you a fisherman? Are you a captain of a boat? Where's your expertise? You may be a former Pharisee, but you're no expert on sea life." Okay? And so he says, "Look, what I'm going to do is I'm going to trust the captain of this ship. And the captain of this ship has assured me that we can sail today." Well, Paul put his total faith in God and went ahead and climbed aboard the boat. And they did set sail. And they did face an entire disaster. It was horrible. They had to dump every ounce of their cargo. But then an angel of the Lord, while they were going through this terrible disaster, showed up to Paul and said, "Look, they may have to lose everything on this ship, but no lives will be lost on this ship. Not one." So Paul went to the captain and the Roman centurion and said, "Look, I've been visited by an angel of the Lord, and I'm telling you that nobody's going to die on this ship. Might look like it, but we're not going to die. We're going to lose all of our cargo, but we're not going to lose our lives on this one." And you know what? They didn't. Not one life was lost on that boat, despite every ounce of cargo having to be dumped overboard. Okay. So, when the whole trip was over with, Paul did have his little moment of saying, "I told you so." But he also left the ship with an encouraging message. Okay? Now, what's the lesson for us? Well, there are lots of people, when they have that "I told you so" situation, they'll just stand there and go, "I told you so, I told you so, I told you so," and they gloat over it. But Paul wasn't gloating over the fact that he was right and they were wrong. He actually left the ship with an encouraging message. Now, the thing is, with people like us today, we don't even have to gloat. If we're right, it's not going to take them very long to figure it out for themselves. They probably won't even look at us when they figure out that we were right all along and these experts were wrong. So we don't have to stand there and gloat. But what makes a true Christian the way he is that even if he does gloat a little bit, which probably he should not do, how many people leave encouraging messages despite the fact that they were right and the experts were wrong? That takes true character. Anybody can stand there and say, "I told you so, I told you so." But not everybody can stand there and say, "I want to give you an encouraging message anyway. I still want to help you." It's just like if you see somebody walking into a bar and you say, "Hey, look, if you walk into that bar, you're going to get yourself into a fight and you're going to get yourself injured." So the guy walks in anyway. And he does get injured. He comes back out and he is injured to the gills. He's just got wounds everywhere. You don't have to say, "I told you so." You could actually take that guy to the hospital and help him get his wounds fixed up. Even though you were right and he was wrong, you can still help him out. That's character. See what I mean? Now, the thing is that men and women do not like people meddling in their affairs. They really don't. Especially ministers. Men and women just think to themselves that they can handle anything. After all, they're smart, or so they think. So they are really apprehensive about letting anybody meddle in their affairs. So when you try to meddle in somebody's affairs, remember they're probably not going to appreciate it very much. unless they ask you to meddle in their affairs. This is especially true of clergymen, your reverends, your ministers, that kind of thing. These people are supposed to meddle in your affairs. And yet people don't like that. See what I mean? They don't like confessing anything to a reverend at all. Maybe that's the reason why they have those confessional booths. Because people are very apprehensive about confessing anything, even the slightest lie. But one thing that men and women truly are apprehensive about is when somebody with no expertise starts meddling in their affairs. They really don't like that, because they feel that that person is an amateur and lacks credibility. Alright. So, that's something to remember. Now, the thing is that when it comes to God, God chooses who He wants to represent Him. God chose Noah. God chose Moses. God chose David. Remember, the first king of Israel, Saul, thought there were lots of other people that could have just as easily become the second king of Israel. God didn't like Saul's choices. So, God picked David. And the same is true in the New Testament as it is in the Old Testament. Remember that the disciples who then became the apostles, alright, they lost Judas. Judas died. So they tried to find a replacement for Judas. So they threw lots, which literally means they gambled. And when they gambled, they picked Matthias. The thing is, God didn't want Matthias being the 12th apostle. Nope. God wanted Paul to be the 12th apostle. So despite the fact that Matthias became their 12th apostle, okay, God said, no, I've chosen Paul instead. Paul's going to write my letters. Paul's going to do this. Paul's going to do that. He will truly become the 12th apostle. See what I mean? Now, did Matthias do the ministry work that God wanted him to do? Of course he did. And he served well as an apostle of God. But he wasn't declared officially the 12th apostle. Paul was, because that's the way God wanted it. God picks the most unusual people to be the ministers He wants them to be. That's something to remember. Let me tell you something. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes were all highly trained men. All of them. They were high intellectuals. Yet Jesus confounded all of them. Now think about the credibility of Jesus. Here He comes out of Galilee. He's not a Pharisee. He's not a Sadducee. He's not an Essene. He's had no real formalized schooling in the way that you and I would understand formalized schooling. But yet, Jesus was able to confound all three of them. All three groups were confounded by Jesus. Because that's the way God wanted it. Okay? Now, the question is, when God sends somebody to meddle in your affairs, and God does tend to do that, how much can you trust them? Well, here's the key. If the person meddling in your affairs is the only person that's going to benefit or profit off of meddling in your affairs, okay, that's not a person you want into your affairs. It's probably not even somebody that was sent by God. Most likely not. Okay? God would not send someone to meddle in your affairs that was going to profit off of your misery. That's a good way to tell whether the person meddling in your affairs is somebody that God sent or somebody that somebody else sent. But if you gain as much from this person meddling in your affairs as the person meddling himself, and everybody benefits by it, that's probably somebody sent by God to meddle in your affairs. See what I mean? And this is something you can remember about teachers too. Let me tell you something. If somebody is teaching you, and the only person that's going to benefit from the teaching that this guy's giving is the teacher himself, it's probably a pretty bad teacher. However, if the teaching he gives to you benefits you, also benefits the teacher, and benefits everybody around him, he's a good teacher. A good teacher learns as much as he teaches. Okay? Now let's say that you feel you've been called upon by God to meddle in the affairs of somebody else. Watch that real carefully. Make sure that God has sent you to meddle in somebody else's affairs, because if you go into somebody else's affairs without God's guidance, it's going to be a disaster. That's what it's going to be. Now let's say you try to meddle in this person's affairs and this person doesn't take your advice right away. That's okay. Become an expert in the affairs of that person. Let's say that person's a lawyer. Learn everything about law. Become an expert like him, and he'll probably most likely listen to you. If he's a doctor, become a doctor yourself, and then talk to him. See what I mean? Now then, another thing to remember is this. Just because somebody's an expert doesn't mean they're always right. Shoot, I've dealt with mechanics for years on my car. And just because the mechanic is smart doesn't necessarily mean they always are right. Let me tell you something. I may not know how to fix a car. Truly, I don't. But I do know that when I get my car back from the shop, I do know when the car's working and when it's not. That I do know. I have enough expertise with cars to tell you when something's working right and when something's not working right. I may not know what the exact problem is, but I know that an engine shouldn't tick a certain way. I can tell when a tire is flat. Doesn't take an expert to tell you that tire is flat. And let me tell you something, I don't care how smart that mechanic is. If I pull my car out of his shop after he gets through fixing it and it's still broke, I'm going to demand my money back, and I'll go find another mechanic. That's the way it'll work. Despite his expertise. Okay? Now then, another thing to remember is this. Let me tell you something. I don't care if a person is the most well-respected lawyer in the world. If he's a thief, he's still a thief. He may be a high-paid thief, but he's still a thief nonetheless. And if I can prove he's a thief, I don't care whether he's a lawyer or not. I'm still going to prove he's a thief. Where's the reference to that? Let's go back to John the Baptist, shall we? John the Baptist knew how corrupt the king was. It didn't matter that the guy was the king and could literally put John's life in jeopardy. He stood in the crowd anyway and he says, look, I can prove that this guy is committing adultery. I don't care if he does cut my head off. I'm going to flat out tell you people, this king of yours, this king of ours, is committing adultery, and it needs to be dealt with. That didn't set too well with the king. Okay? It's the same thing with the health care law. Okay? This is my example. with the healthcare law. I've been reading through the healthcare law. You've seen all my videos so far. Alright. In one of my videos, I addressed a direct lie. We had politicians standing there saying, hey, the United States will never pay for an abortion under this new healthcare law. That was a flat-out lie. And I read word for word out of the healthcare law where they said they were going to pay for abortions. Did I stand there and stand back and say, I ain't going to say nothing? Nope. I stood there and I said, this is what the politicians are saying. This is what the healthcare law says. And what they're saying and what's in that law are two different things. And you need to understand that. What they're saying and what's in here is a complete contradiction. As long as you can back it up, you can say it. As a matter of fact, in the not-so-distant future, I'm going to post up a video where I'm going to start talking about creationism. I'm not going to do it right now, but I'm going to do it soon. And one of the things I'm going to tell you, and in that video, I'm going to have in the description below a link to a website which will tell you what I'm going to tell you. There is no such thing as a brontosaurus. Now, I'm not going to tell you about all that in this video, but in a future video, I'm going to show you that there really is no brontosaurus. You've been lied to. And I will back it up. Not in this video, but in another video, I will back it up. So anybody that stands there and tells you that there is such a thing as a brontosaurus, wait until I put that video out there, and as soon as I do, and I give you that link, I want you to go back to him and say, here's the link, and this says there is no such a thing as a brontosaurus. And this is a highly reputable scholar that's standing here saying to you, there is no such thing as a brontosaurus. So stop saying it, because it's not true. I don't care what that textbook tells you. This article says completely different. There are going to be lots of things in the not-so-distant future where I'm going to tell you certain things that you are not being told in school. And they're going to completely contradict what's in your textbooks. And that's going to be the end of that. So the next time somebody says to you, hey, there's such a thing as a brontosaurus, you say, no, there isn't. And I got a guy that can prove it. And I'll back it up. Alright. That's all I've got to say for this particular video. You've been packed with a lot of stuff here in this one. I will tell you more in a future video, so stay tuned.